slightly mad. I'm going slightly mad.
Hello everybody. Hello Aloysius. Happy New Year. I'd say I get the first video of the year. I know, isn't that exciting? I don't think they realised. No, I don't think they realised either. As a new year and a new jacket. So, what are we doing? We're giving a book update. What we always do. Ah, yes. Yes, we're doing a book update. Have we done stuff? Yes, we have stuff. We have done stuff. But before we get to the book update, remember, if you want to support us, there is our shop where we have books and writing services and other things. And there is our Redbubble shop where there are over 100 designs. Valentine's Day, not that long away. Yeah, I know that was blatant. I know it was blatant, but we always forget. And there's a whole load of Valentine's Day stuff. Okay, fine. Right, so that is where you can support us if you want to support us that way. If you want to support us without spending any money, like, subscribe, comment, and share, because that all helps us. Right, so book update. Yes. So I was thinking about this. This is something I was thinking about. You were thinking. Yes, I was thinking, because we've come off a lot of work and I actually have had enough of a rest that I can start thinking again. Oh, that's nice. Is that weird? Yeah, it's a bit weird. But I was, you know, because writing a book is not exactly linear, and you often end up with bits of the plot that will turn up out of order, which is why we have a notebook to just write things down in. Yes. So even though we're sort of not up to that point yet, we start thinking about that and start planning for, you know, the end of the story, because you have the big architecture, but, you know, you get some ideas that fit here or here, even though you haven't got all the big architecture up yet. No. And besides, you can't really plan out the little stuff. No, you can't. It's very hard to plan out the little stuff. I can understand planning the big architecture. I've always been good at planning, knowing where I'm going. But it's sort of like taking a trip. You can't know if you're going to get stuck in a traffic snarl and decide, you know what, we're going to go off to this little village and wait for the traffic to clear and have this interesting adventure. Yes, exactly. And so it's a bit like that. It's less of a, you know, a very strict progression. And I think that people who end up tied to things like that, I think those books can end up very dull. I find that the more time you give it writing to a schedule, it's more formulaic. It has to be more formulaic. Is that why we don't read Jane Austen in a row? Yeah, that's kind of why we don't read 2 Jane Austens in a row. Ooh, we're starting out well for the new year. We've already slagged off Jane Austen. Let's see how much further we can go. Oh, you know it's going to be a good year if we're already starting out doing that. There we go. Oh, you are on to a good start. We are on to a good start. I've had a week off. I feel better. Yes, when something becomes formulaic, it's kind of dull. So I don't write in a strictly linear. I know what's going into each chapter. I know which chapters are going where. I know what the arc of the narrative is, but I don't know all the little bits. And it's all the little bits is something I wanted to talk about. So I was thinking about this in relation to 2 books. One book Janice has talked about. The Dead Man in Deptford? Yeah, The Dead Man in Deptford. And one of the issues that she had with that was the way that it depicted women. And we had a commenter come on and say, no, yes, well, the Elizabethan theatre is blah, 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 blah. It's like, I know that, but that didn't explain the problem I had with the book, or that Janice had with the book. We understand how Elizabethan theatre works. We just didn't see the need for women to be cattle and degraded. And that is one aspect of things that this particular topic is the depictions of, you know, women in historical fiction. Because when done badly, and that is an example of it done badly, and this bleeds over into fantasy as well. So, you know, I'm not just attacking one, but because I'm currently writing something which is in part classified as historical fiction. It's much more literary fiction and it's much more experimental, but it is still historical fiction. I am still setting it in a historical past. I wanted to think about the way women are depicted in historical novels. So there is the first way. The dismiss women, decide historically women had no agency. Well, not exactly, but they had no political or economic power. They didn't have no agency, and that is where the depiction of women in very passive and backgroundy roles becomes really frustrating, because contemporary sources. You know, I mean, we have contemporary sources of the times that these things were written, and the women don't behave the same way that they do in a lot of these historical novels that decide, you know what, writing women's too hard, so we're just going to shove them in the background. And not women in the background like a la Barry Humphries. We're just going to shove them in the background and they're there, but they're, you know, nothing. They're not part of the plot. They don't engage. They are less than fully human. Because that's how the men saw them. Are you sure, honey? Are you sure? You see this with a lot of high fantasy that's based on medieval things. Tolkien. Oh, we're being really in trouble. We're going to get in trouble, aren't we? We are so going to get in trouble. The Jane Austen people and the Tolkien people. But, you know, the absolute sausage fest that is Tolkien's writing is a good example of this, and it is part of the reason why this carries on across high fantasy to this day, because that is their model. Yes, there is more, let's try to put more women in, but it's still not there. Now, am I saying that a contemporary, modern, Western woman would fit into a medieval setting? No. But, or a different setting. But I think that one of the reasons why this happens is, and I'm not going to throw Anthony Burgess under the bus here entirely by suggesting that he doesn't know his stuff, because he does know his stuff. I think he had a very different reason for the way that he was depicting the women, and it had less to do with his depictions of women as such as his grappling with depicting any kind of homosexual identity, and he was using an Athenian concept, and Athenians were renowned for having lousy opinions of women. So I think that is where that came from with Anthony Burgess. I respect Anthony Burgess as a writer enough to not throw him under the bus and say, oh yeah, well, obviously he didn't know he knew his stuff. But I think that a lot of it does come when people don't know their stuff. They don't read from the period that they are actually looking at. You're talking about Chaucer. Well, Chaucer, there are other European texts from the medieval period that are fictional. There are legitimate primary texts of people who are real, like Eloise and Abelard. Now, Eloise is an extraordinary woman. And you do find that what you have to do is start reading some texts that maybe you might find less comfortable, because a lot of the women of that period who were extraordinary, as in educated and able to leave texts of their own, not filtered through somebody else, do come from religious orders, and what they are writing is primarily religious in nature. But it does give an indication that this does exist. So the concept of the entirely silent when it comes to history, and this is, I think, where people get a little unstuck, is just because a group is silent doesn't mean that they don't exist or that that is how they were perceived. It means that they didn't leave textual bases. It's why it's difficult, the further back you go, to research the lives of common people. For most of history, we are looking at the 1%ers, the educated elites, because they are the ones who leave documentary evidence. The majority of people, not just the majority of women, but the vast majority of people in history prior to mass literacy left very little behind them in terms of written records. And so for most, we don't know a lot about lives, about the way people thought, about the way people behaved, from primary sources. We have to see them filtered through things. We have to find glimpses where we can. We find them in something like the Canterbury Tales. We find them in other narrative texts where these people are depicted. Yes, they're depicted in an exaggerated and comedic manner often, like the Miller's Tale. But at the same time, those are the places, there and archaeology are the places where we can find traces of these people. So silence on the historical record doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that we don't have textual evidence for them. That is not an excuse to silence and not create characters that could work in that world. Now, we get to the other side of things. So if the Dead Man in Deptford is an example of the silencing or the ignoring and not creating any, like just disregarding, like, oh no, it's too hard, I'm not going to bother. Not saying Anthony Burgess was doing that, but a lot of writers do. You're going there. I am 2026. We're going there. We are going there. A lot of writers do, especially older writers, like older fantasy, especially older historical writing does go there. Now, this gets me to the other one that I hate. You're really getting it now. Is this the one you'd think on paper looks like something you'd like? Yeah, this is the one that on paper looks like something I'd like. Hamnet. So I've seen this about. It's a film. The Maggie O'Farrell novel has been turned into a film. It's been adapted. It looks beautiful. I don't like it. So I have been sort of looking about and thinking, oh, is this the kind of book I'd like? on paper it says, yes, it's about, its main character is Anne Hathaway, or Mrs. Shakespeare, as at the time she would have been known. She wouldn't have been known as Anne Hathaway. She would have been Mrs. Shakespeare. Sorry, it's not erasure. It's structural, the way that culture was structured. Yeah, I know. Let's just say Anne Hathaway would not be known at all were she not Mrs. Shakespeare. That's true. It's tough, but it's true. It's true. So the story about Anne Hathaway and the death of Hamnet, Shakespeare's son. Now, that seems like, yes, you like Shakespeare, you're interested in historical things. That sounds like, on paper, great idea. Why don't we read it? I started having a look for it. It does the things that I really hate. I'm not reading that thing. I've read enough of it to know that I'm not reading that thing. So I read the whole sample that I could get on bookstore website. Yes. And it is a prime example of what I really don't think is it's the opposite end of the erasing women from historical fiction. It's the, oh, let's make her a special woman. Oh dear. Yeah. So Anne Hathaway becomes a natural healer and a witchy woman in Warwickshire. Yeah, in Warwickshire. A witchy woman in late 16th century Warwickshire. You're seeing the problem. I am seeing the problem. Okay, let me paint this problem for you. Now, why does that annoy the hell out of me? Because it's this idea that, oh no, she has to be something special. She has to be some sort of, extraordinary thing. Late 16th century Warwickshire is not a place that you want to have a ooky spooky new agey identity. Okay? No. 1590s Warwickshire is becoming increasingly Puritan. In fact, Stratford-upon-Avon itself is puritanical. Shakespeare's daughter married a Puritan. Judith's husband was a Puritan. The man who got the bulk of Shakespeare's inheritance was a Puritan who hated the theatre. The Puritans didn't allow, the Puritan Council, the Puritan government or governance of the town did not allow their most famous member, their most famous community member, the man who had the big house in town, the man who was in London making a name for himself. They did not allow him and the Chamberlain's men, or the King's men as they would become, they did not allow the Chamberlain's men to come to Stratford-upon-Avon and perform. It's really, really easy when looking at historical things to forget how close certain things are together and to look at, oh, this is London, therefore everything must be like that. Everyone must love the theatres. No. England was becoming a checkerboard of places where travelling companies could and couldn't play. Now, for somebody like Shakespeare, who Stephen Greenblatt suggests that the Shakespeare family, we know that his mother's family, definitely, but that the Shakespeare family were hidden Catholics, members of what by this point is a highly persecuted minority group, a minority religion that will become increasingly persecuted. Do you think having a witchy wife is going to help that? No. In a puritanical town. This is not a good idea. This, it's like, she might be Mrs. Shakespeare, but that won't save her getting burnt as a witch. It's very easy to, when doing something historical, to look at the bits that you want to see, that, oh, I need to know X, Y, and Z, but to forget about the wider historical implications and the wider historical things that are happening. Yes, the Elizabethan age was an era of slightly more religious tolerance than either the Jacobin or the preceding her siblings' times on the throne, and certainly her father's. But this doesn't mean it was some enlightened New Agey era of toleration. It was just a don't ask, don't tell. We're not going to try to, unless there is something particularly bad happening, a la Mary Queen of Scots and around the execution of her, unless you are, a missionary priest from France, from the seminary that trained Englishmen to be missionary priests to try and re-Catholicize England, chances are you're probably going to, if you kept your head down and you went to the Anglican Mass or you paid the fine, you're probably going to be okay-ish. Really dangerous. You are a member of a persecuted minority. You're not going to be drawing attention to yourself by having this weird healer wife. That's hard. That's dumb. That's just plain dumb. I think it's very easy to forget how close to the death of Shakespeare that the English Civil War was. The theatres closed within the lifetime of what his children lived. The English Civil War, Shakespeare dies in 1616, Burbage dies a bit later. The theatres closed not long after that, few years after that. The Carillon Theatre period is very, very short. The big playhouses close as the Puritans exert dominance. War breaks out. So Shakespeare dies 1616. War breaks out, the English Civil War, 26 years later in 1642. They're not in a position to fight a civil war like that. This is a slow progression of development of a religious group and a political ideology which is diametrically opposed to the world that Shakespeare exists within and that the kings support. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. That happens slowly and systematically across the lifetime of someone like Shakespeare, especially his adult lifetime and subsequent years. You don't raise an army overnight. The tensions between Parliament and the King did not happen like that. You don't suddenly go to war like just overnight. This is a simmering tension, and it takes a lot to get that up to that point where it's like, yes, we can fight a civil war. We are willing to take on the king. Now, that background is important. King James was a ferocious witch hunter. He was a ferocious witch hunter. Now, we also know that there aren't any witches. There aren't real witches. These were just women who were often disenfranchised, who had money that somebody else wanted, who were suffering mental illness, who were suffering mental decline, who were vagrants. These women were victims of judicial murder. This is a real world, and it's a dangerous world. And it's a dangerous world to be a very vulnerable woman. So deciding, oh, you know what? I'm going to paint the prettiest possible picture of this world. The picture postcard version. Because being ostracized from your town is exceptionally dangerous. And that is the image that is painted in the first few pages of Hamnet, is a woman and a family who are ostracized because of her weirdness. For a woman in the 1590s to be being ostracized like that, I don't care who your husband is, that is incredibly dangerous. That is not making her a powerful woman. That is this is an incredibly dangerous position to have. And you are talking about a real person who we know survived her husband by 7 years. So who was still alive in the 1620s. This is not how you create a strong female character. She has to fit in her world. You can't just decide, oh, this is how I want. An extraordinary man needs an extraordinary wife. Well, what do we know about her? We know that she was a bit older than him. We know that they were separated for long periods, and she therefore was in charge of his business interests in Stratford. She appears to have managed an awful lot of the money. Now, his father was a bit rubbish at business. Yeah, we do know that about him. That he kept getting himself into issues and problems, and that, Will going to London and making his fortune on the stage was very important. That Shakespeare did a lot of this for his father's esteem, especially the buying a coat of arms, having a coat of arms for the Shakespeare family, and elevating them to gentleman's status. That was an important thing. There is a reason why Shakespeare's grave and marker is not really the marker of a playwright, but the marker of a successful businessman, because a puritanical council is not going to respect the playwright. He is seen as a businessman, and his Stratford business is overseen by Anne. Anne is the one who has that. That is an extraordinary woman. That is a strong relationship. Someone who's like, right, I'm in London. I need you to look after what's happening here. So that gives you a character of financial acumen, of enormous independence, of canny businesswoman. Those things are all possible in that world. But weird witchy woman who gives birth out in the forest? Are you kidding me? She'd get strung up. She'd get strung up, and that behavior would endanger an entire family. Not just herself, her children, her husband, her parents, any siblings, they would all get caught in a paranoid world. This is a paranoid world, and if if covert Catholics is one thing, witches, not gonna happen. So that really annoys me. You're gonna do that annoys me. So how do you do it? I'm glad you asked about that. Ultimately, both of these depictions of women, as in the strong female archetype, which isn't strong female archetype, it's anachronistic and bollocks, and the let's fade women into the background because women aren't considered, both of these depictions actually diminish men. But I thought we were talking about women. Yeah, we are talking about women. We are. Why do I say they diminish men? Because both of them are coming from a perception that women are not essential to men. That women's participation in men's lives is not essential. So the idea that, women are in the background and men have no use for them and have no need for them, that diminishes men. That basically cuts off men in a way that is, right, so you have no emotional life, you have no care, you have no affection, you have no need for love, you have no need for compassion, for softness, for tenderness. You have no need to have someone who can push back at you, who can challenge you. Because if you diminish your wife to such an extent, or the women in the world around you to such an extent, that's what you're saying. And it's not true anyway. It's not true anyway. I can't remember where I read this, but the more loud and aggressive women are domestically is proportional to how much their voice has been diminished publicly. So people talk about this when they talk about very patriarchal cultures that actively suppress women's public-facing rights. That is where you will get very loud, very dominating matriarchs within the domestic sphere. So it's not a case that if you suppress women in one area, they are going to be suppressed across the board. No, they are going to be the big, loud mother, wife, the nagging wife. That is where they are going to have their voice heard. It is there is a level of this across multiple cultures. It is very visible. So a depiction of women who just sidle into the background and never challenge and never do anything is a complete fabrication. It's not how the psychology actually works. And it's not how these cultures, the cultures where women are not publicly visible, works. There are the images, the medieval images of like the scold and the fishwife are there deliberately because when your public voice is suppressed, these women come out vocally and loudly and obnoxiously should they wish. They will find a way to do this. So if you're going to suppress them in one particular place, you then have to show, well, this is the result of this. Now, that suppression, it creates a very unhealthy dynamic, which is a problem, but that becomes part of your conflict to talk about. That becomes part of the narrative. Nobody is well behaved. There is no such thing as a well-behaved. You know, not every man was beating his wife. It was, yes, it was widespread, but it wasn't ubiquitous, and it wasn't a case that this is the only, that this is, it wasn't the case that this is every woman was beaten into submission, because she wasn't. It also suggests that that also is, again, diminishing your male characters by suggesting that they are so weak and fragile that they cannot cope with having the challenge of a loud wife. I think Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare was clearly a loud wife. Why? Because she was the one managing the business at home in Stratford. You can't not be a loud wife when you have to be the person at home while your husband is away. You know, there are, I mean, Shakespeare puts them into his own plays. And we're not talking about the harridans like Queen Margaret, but there are these strong women and men who admire the strong women in his plays, from his early plays all the way through. You know, we get the strongest marriage, although probably the most corrupt individuals, is Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. They're the strongest marriage in the entire canon. They back each other to the hilt. They are the best married couple. They're murderous psychopaths, but they are the best married couple, and it is a push-pull relationship. There is not a case that, there is not one moment where Macbeth actually, you know, attempts to assert dominance over his wife by hitting her, by anything like any sort of violence towards her. He treats her as a respected wife. He mourns her. He doesn't have time to mourn her, but when she dies, he mourns her. It is a marriage, and it's a turbulent marriage, and they're real characters, and they're contemporary characters, which gives you an indication of this is the people in the theatre were able to recognize this as, hey, that is something I recognize. Lady Macbeth is not just a villain, she's a real character. Lady Macduff gets like a tiny bit of her screen time, and even Lady Macduff is a real person. She gets one scene and her child gets killed in front of her before she gets killed, and the rest. But she is a real character. She is confused by her husband and his behavior and what's going on. But she is a real character. She's not a silent character, and she is critical of her husband and what is happening. She is confused. She is really wondering why this husband, who had until now protected them, has abandoned them. And she is understanding we are in a really vulnerable position. This is not a world of silent women. This is a world where women are there, but they are not public. There's a difference between public silence and private agency. Now, what about us? Bring this all back to us. Yes. Now, the reason I was thinking about this is when I planned the book that we're writing, I knew that it was going to have a very male-heavy cast, purely because of the world that I was creating. I knew that, okay, I'm not going to have a lot of female characters in here. I'm not quite certain how this is going to work, but we'll make it work. I'm not sure. We'll see what turns up. Now, I told you several weeks ago, months ago, I think I told you about how I had come up with a horoscope for my main character, my lead character. I plotted it all in and came up with like full chart, everything. And it was while reading the chart that I was reading it, and I'm like, yes, this character can do everything that I want them to do, but he needs a partner. This chart, these placements, this personality is not going to be happy with just flings. They're going to need a partner. And then the question is, well, what's she like? What is this person's partner like? What is going to attract him within the rules of the society that he exists in? What is going to attract him? And that's the way I started creating that character. So instantly I have one female character, and she has to be a proper character because she has to match her partner. That means they, and when we pick up a lot of it, we pick up a long-term partner. So a long relationship, and that intimacy needs to be within that dynamic. That's going to create a strong character within the rules of the society, conforming to the rules of the society in which they exist. Now, I thought, okay, so I've got one. And then I knew I needed another one who was going to be more comic character, which was fine. She hasn't really come to the forefront yet, but she's far more comic. She's more of a comic foil than a more serious character. She's bringing out different sides of people. So, and she's more of a fangirly type of character. So that gives you a different sort of dynamic. But there's also an interesting power dynamic in that, which is more weighted to her than to the other characters. So that also gives a different relationship. And then, because, as I said, I'm thinking non-linearly, and I got an idea, and it was, it allowed me to shift a lot of exactly what I was doing at the end, and add a lot more detail and a lot more twist to the ending, which is good, because I was a little bit worried that my ending was going to look a bit too just too simple. But that was a sister. Now, we don't ever meet the sister in person, but her presence, her existence, and the role that she plays in the main character's life makes her another one of these characters. The way she's spoken about, the respect that she is spoken with, the understanding that, you know what, the best person for this job, it's her. She's going to be she's better than me. So you have two brothers talking about their sister. But, you know, I was sent to do this, but you know what? This isn't a that problem. This is a this problem. She's the one who's got to help you with that problem. And so you have another woman who's come in entirely without me expecting her, who's being spoken of by two men with enormous respect because of where her particular skill set is. And her particular skill set is in relational things. Because, why? These are her brothers. That's how she relates to them. It's not a power thing. It's a relational thing. It's, well, yeah, you need her. She'll put you back on your feet. And so these characters came not because I decided I'm going to write a strong female character, but because I treated the male characters with respect. If you treat your characters as human beings with a full range of emotion first, then what happens is they start to bring others in with them. They develop organically from each other, because that's how we work. We are not isolated. We are not, no man is an island. Robinson Crusoe would have gone mad. Isolated. We are not isolated. We bring each other, and we have familial ties, we have community ties, we have ties of affection, and those cross gender. Now, you have to follow, when you're putting something in a historical position, you have to follow the rules of the society, which we know what the rules often are. You need to look contextually widely. And if you want people to actually read your book, you kind of have to, make sure that people are human, that they're human first if you want it to have that impact. Because I'm not paying money to read Hamnet. Aside from having a strong female protagonist in the modern sense, it's very flowery writing. You don't like flowery writing? I'm not particularly fond of flowery writing. It's very wishy-washy. It's very wishy-washy writing. It's very purple prose. It's very feelings. There's nothing wrong with feelings, but when it takes the place of narrative thrust, I have a bit of a problem with that. I get bored. I get so bored. So anyway, that's where we're up to. I think I've talked enough about creating the strong female characters that don't fit within their historical context or diminish the humanity of the characters around them, in particular the men around them, which I think people under recognize. It's very, very easy to claim, oh, I have a strong female character, and it's like, no, you don't. What you have are weak men, and so you've either diminished the women to make the men look stronger, or worse, you have created your strong female character especially to diminish the men, which is just plain wrong. It doesn't work that way. You don't make someone strong by diminishing the other. So that's where I am. You create two strong characters that work together. You don't raise someone up by pulling someone down. That's the biggest thing. Now, historically, men and women often lived in different spheres and had strengths and weaknesses in those different spheres. Somebody who is publicly dominant may be privately less dominant. Someone who's publicly silenced is likely to be domestically loud. That's how this works. You create that balance. Does that mean everyone has to get along and be cheery? No. Conflict is what makes a narrative. I'm not saying you have to have all your women have to be good. No, Lady Macbeth is a psychopath. She's brilliant, but she's a psychopath. Goneril and Regan are psychopaths. Cordelia is a nothing. Cordelia is so good she's nothing. She's boring. However, we sit there and we watch Goneril and Regan tear each other, the kingdom, their father, a leading courtier apart. And it's fun in some ways. I mean, it's not my favourite play, but they're strong characters who are completely evil. Or completely psychotic and violent. It's not a question of morality, it's a question of intent, of putting strength into the building of your characters, not into, oh, they're special. All you're doing that way is creating a historical manic pixie dream girl. So we don't want any more erasures, and we don't want any more historical manic pixie dream girls who should be burnt as witches. So we're going to avoid those potholes. We'll probably find our own potholes. We will find our own potholes, which we will be entirely blind to because that is what it is as a writer. But I hope you enjoyed this, and we will be back later with another update when we have some more writing done. Her ladyship will be away for a bit because as she hogged a whole load of videos, we are actually on holidays, so we're going to have a good deal of time to write, which is, oh, yay. So we might be back again at the end of the month with another update. We might not, don't know, but we'll certainly have, Janice will be here next week. She's got a book that she meant to do last month, but her ladyship hogged all the slots, and then her Infernal Majesty had to have one because, yeah, we're not bumping her Infernal Majesty from Christmas. Oh boy. So anyway, until then, do you want to say it? Yes. Ich bin ja Jesus. Bye-bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.